What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to Console Creatures. This is a very special Monster Hunter Wilds review discussion. My name is Matt, and I'll be your host for today's events. I'm joined by video game reporter extraordinaire, Mr. Veerender Jubbal. What's up, V?
I'm doing well. What about yourself?
I'm doing well. Thanks for joining me, dude.
Thank you very much for letting me on for this, especially so like close to release
Oh,
and embargo.
dude, I've seen you like talk Monster Hunter. I've seen the articles. The love that you have for the series is obvious. So when Bobby told me you were interested, I was like, this is a slam dunk. No worries. We got to get you on here. And also joining us is Hayes Madsen from Inverse. What's up, Hayes?
Hey, thanks for having me on again.
Dude, likewise. I'm excited. I know you just rocked with the rest of the crew just a couple weeks ago, right? Was it a
Yeah, like 2 weeks ago. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was sitting there. I was just like, okay, cool. Yeah, I wanted to hang with Hayes. No worries. Leave me out of that conversation, Bobby. Why don't you?
Been a lot of games recently. Oof.
Been a lot of games, and we have another one on the horizon here with Monster Hunter Wilds, folks. Monster Hunter hitting pretty much all of your next gen platforms. It is imminent. We're following up on Rise. There's so much to dig in here. We're not going to be spoiling anything. This is all going to be relatively spoiler free as much as we can to talk about the game without giving anything away, because some of the reveals here are pretty cool. But before we get into that, I want to know about each of yours history with the series a little bit. Where did you dive in? How long have you been monster hunting? V, I'll start with you. What's the history with yourself and Monster Hunter a little bit?
So for me, Rise was my first proper foray that I bought myself and owned. I would see like high schoolers and like classmates play the game on PSP because that's where it was very big originally for a lot of players. But I got into Rise because it was also Switch exclusive, so that was like a big. I know a lot of people didn't like it being a Switch exclusive, but I thought it was fine. I played the original demo that they had where you could only play like 30 times.
Yeah.
And the online was it did not work. So if you played online, it would waste one of your tries completely. So then I just played like almost 20 plus times just alone, and I just loved it. Like I finally had the opportunity to. There was no like it lets you play all the weapons and everything, and then I was like, yeah, it's if I buy the game and the online doesn't work, that's fine. I'll just hunt monsters alone. But then the online was completely fixed on full release, which was that was only maybe a month or two later, which is very surprising in the sense of how like game design and game dev stuff works. And then I put like 300 hours into Rise.
God damn.
Without Sunbreak, so I still need to play Sunbreak, but yeah, I absolutely love the series from there, and I got a chance to see some behind closed door stuff at SGF for Wilds as well, and I have like a funny story on that, which is so they showed me so Bobby and I were sitting on the crowd for that one. We didn't know until like it was done because it's dark room. You can barely. Yeah. At the end of it, I because they weren't taking any questions or anything, so I just wanted to thank them for like, oh, I'm so glad you folks are doing like South Asian, Indigenous, and representation and aesthetics and turban representation, and then they're like, we can't talk about that, and I'm like, you showed me an hour of that. So yeah, then I was so glad I got to dive in with this new one pretty early on, and yeah, so Rise was my first foray, and I felt like without the wire bug stuff, I was a bit hesitant because the wire bug stuff, I'm like I can't ever go back to any other Monster Hunter if the wire bug stuff is not there, because it helps so much with mobility.
It does.
Yeah.
But we'll talk how the lack of the wire bug in Wilds kind of affects us. But Hayes, what about you, my dude? What's your kind of history with the series?
Yeah, my history's kind of interesting. I have been trying to get into this series for like 12 years. And I have bounced off almost every single time. That being said, I've played every single Monster Hunter game that came out because I know so many people that are into it. So every game I keep being like, maybe this will be the one. But I bounced off all of them. Even Worlds, I only played for like 15 hours and I just lost interest. But my piece that'll be up for embargo with this. This is the one. This is the one that
Nice.
finally clicked for me.
That's awesome, dude. I'm similar. I've tried for so long. Worlds was the first one that kind of finally grabbed me. And then similarly, I played a bunch of Rise as well. But this one's special.
Yeah.
This one's real good. So I'm happy that I wasn't the only one, because I kept trying. I had all the pieces that I knew I would like it, and it just I couldn't get past the way that the game felt. But no longer.
Yeah. We'll talk about it, but like this is the Monster Hunter for people that couldn't get into Monster Hunter. Like I firmly feel like this is the one where it'll click. You'll get it.
So let's talk top level. Let's talk surface level. How do we feel about the game? Hayes, I'm going to start with you. How do you like Monster Hunter Wilds?
Yeah, I like it a lot. I think the more I've thought about it, I think the reason this one clicks for me is just the pacing of everything. I'm not even just talking about story pacing, just like a lot of the reason I couldn't get into past games is because it just felt too monotonous. Like I didn't want to just grind out hunts and get all this equipment, and it felt like the big moments were too spread out. This completely does away with that. Like it really feels, I don't know that streamlined is the right word, but everything, this game is so focused on keeping you into the experience, whether it's through the story, which is significantly better than any Monster Hunter I've played. Or, like you're going maybe 15 to 20 minutes before the next big hunt. Like, unless you want to go and grind out all that stuff, but there's not really a need for you to continuously grind. And I think that's what makes it click. On top of a few other like little changes, like the new wound system is phenomenal. So overall, I like it. And I think that's the big takeaway I have, is just how much faster this feels than all the other Monster Hunter games I've played, even World in a lot of ways.
I have to agree with you. I feel like your time is never wasted here. Even when you're doing like the big hunts, you finish it and you'll usually have enough parts to at least craft a couple things. You're never able to make the full set, obviously, because Monster Hunter never wants you to be able to do it in one shot, but you've given enough that you feel that reward instantaneously, with like that kind of scratch at the back of your brain telling you, hey, you want to finish out the set because you're going to look cool. And obviously there's great stats here, but I never felt punished for just kind of building my hunter the way that I wanted it to, especially over the course of the narrative. But it just constantly keeps you moving in a really satisfying way. V, what about you, my dude?
I absolutely love it. It's fantastic. So I actually have no issues without the wire bug stuff. Like I was surprised I didn't. Like I played a few hours into it, and I played the first live demo, which was December, maybe. December something. So, and they gave like the whole Windward Plains, which is like, that's one of the main maps in the game. So I was surprised, like even allowing players to have that. And I think for being able to do that is a lot to bring in new players as well, like Hayes was mentioning. So I don't have experience to like, I've never played anything else outside of Rise or try Rise, but then so I don't have like the world's experience to try that. I've seen videos in regards to that, but I think it's absolutely fantastic. Like I'm playing alone, so I didn't even get on the multiplayer stuff like that. But the story is significantly better. Like there's a story there that makes it's compelling. It's making me care about these characters a lot. And I finished the story maybe a few days ago. Like the main story. Credits.
Yeah, exactly.
Credit. Yeah. It's a lot. It's very compelling. It's very interesting. I like how your hunter is more of like a famed celebrity, but still reacts to the situation not as a blank slate whatsoever. Like they're very endearing and commanding and very fortunate as well. So it does do away with like a blank slate, which I felt Rise was pretty like blank slate. I don't even remember if I could like talk.
I think this is the first game where the hunter has a voice.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Even your Palico,
Yeah.
talks in this one, which
Yeah.
I actually really liked. I feel like it just added a little bit more personality to them. I do agree that this is the most narrative I think I've seen from Monster Hunter,
Oh,
and it's
by far,
handled
yeah.
a lot more delicately and deftly than I think I anticipated from this series, and not for any reason, but we just haven't had that here. Along with, I mean, everybody always knows that like your big monster introductions are always going to be these like massive cinematic moments that like as they come crashing in. These moments are awesome. They're like we can't even go that far into them because they're special surprises for when you kind of run up on these things for the first time. But even outside of that, this game has like almost Uncharted level like cinematic moments outside of the monster reveals. Like even just the opening segment when you're like running through the desert, all the monsters kind of hopping out around you. There's like sand. There's a sandstorm going everywhere. There's like genuine moments even outside of the fights here that just keep you engaged in a way that I feel like before those cinematic moments came with those monster introductions. Now they're much more frequent and they're awesome. Like
Mhm.
they're huge.
Mhm.
I want to go back to the wound system that you brought up, Hayes, because I agree. I feel like the way that they've done this is like if you're hitting a monster enough, a wound might pop up. If you target that with that kind of with the special targeted focus mode and deal damage there, you'll do a lot of damage. You'll stun them for a sec, and you're kind of able to lay in a lot more. I feel like with previous Monster Hunter entries, you were kind of just left smacking that thing, smacking the
Yeah.
monster willy nilly. While here, giving you that focus mode, giving you those wounds almost helps you learn by doing rather than having to go and read up on the monster after to see what's severable, what breaks, what
Yeah.
using that monster. That thing is still important and
Yeah.
you will need it, but it makes it, I think, a little bit more natural. So Hayes, why don't you tell me a little bit more about that wound system and how you felt about it?
Yeah, exactly. So like it's not necessarily something entirely new to the series, right? Because like you could
Mhm.
always cut parts off monsters and
Of course.
exploit their weak points. But what this does is it visualizes all that much better. So
Mhm.
like if you cause a wound on a monster, there's a bright orange spot, and you use like a focus attack, and you can take advantage of that. And what that also means is like in past games, if you cut off different pieces, you could get extra materials. But now you're getting a lot more materials per
Yeah.
battle
Mhm.
because the wound system makes it so easy to to find these spots. Um, and I think what it does is just anyone who's experienced in Monster Hunter wouldn't need something like that, right? But
Mhm.
for someone who's new or someone like me who's bounced off of it, it makes I guess the way I'd say it is it makes battles much more like readable.
Yeah.
It makes it more easy to come up with your strategy. Like if you want to hit the monster's legs where it's going to pop up a weak point, or on
It's
its head
very
where the weak point's going to
satisfying
pop up.
as
Oh yeah,
well. Like it's incredibly satisfying.
yeah. It's just like huge damage. You got these big numbers and pieces falling off and explosion, and it's just like, oh, it feels so good to use these wounds, especially like if a monster has 4 wounds and you hit one. There's
Mm,
usually a chance you'll just hit all 4.
chain
Mhm.
them
So
all.
like
Yeah.
out of nowhere, you're causing like 1,500 damage.
Well, that, and I feel like it kind of changes the ebb and flow of combat a little more, where you're now much more able to stun the monster and have a couple seconds to either slam a potion down or get in some attacks in an area where you need it to most. It kind of gives you that ability to do so without it just being catching it while it's moving or while it's sleeping or whatever else. These moments are, again, much more readable. um it's just really good. V, any other thoughts on that system before we kind of bounce off onto the next topic?
I main Sword and Shield and the bow and arrow. I thought they like Hayes was saying with the wound system works completely with all of the weapons because they
Mhm.
all have their own by just making the focus system and just making the wound system like that. It it improves all of the weapons and their usages and what you can do with them, like climbing on the back, and you can make at least up to 2 or 3 wounds by just with the knife.
Mhm.
And then the finisher attack is like strong and great, and it's just satisfying each time. And you always do get a piece when you break a wound, which
Mhm.
is very plentiful, but you're not you're still gonna have to come back to fight the monster if you want more stuff, of course, but it's not so overabundant as people might have thought.
Mhm.
But it's just extremely satisfying to get your cinematic specials in any form, and it improves. And that one system improves the gameplay system for all of the weapons, because now the bow can just do the homing, and then when you shoot a wound with the bow, with the homing tracker homing thing, then you shoot once and then you get like an uninterrupted for sure shot again, where you're kind of invulnerable and the monster will be down for a few seconds. I think it's fantastic and great. Yeah.
I love that you brought that up, because I was going to ask kind of like what your main weapons were, because again, here we're able to have two, you're able to have a main weapon and a secondary weapon, which again,
that's a complete game changer.
Hopping on your secret, you can swap in and out at any time. They're always nearby. But letting you have two not only opens up the world of the weapons to the player, because now they have to think about, okay, I've only ever used A, now I have an option for B. How do I do that? What's important to me? So for myself, I was always an Insect Glaive main across World and Rise. And this time I was like, you know what? I love that thing, but I feel like something new. So I went with the longsword this time and lived out my anime shonen protagonist dreams. And similarly, I grabbed the bow as my secondary to kind of give myself a little bit of that long and short. But just having access to those two weapons, and obviously going to the training center and really spending time to understand how these function, it just gives you so much more to play with. Hayes, what about you? What weapons were you meaning?
I agree. I think the best play is like melee weapon, ranged weapon, because it just gives you so many other options. I've played around with a few different ones. I used the great sword at first, and then I used the charge blade. I'm on the dual blades now, with light bow gun as like my second. And I love it so much. It's just like a really agile build where I'm just all about dodging and like poking monsters and then dodging out, and it feels really good. I love having that. Was one of my big problems in past games, is like it feels so restrictive when you only have one weapon.
Yeah.
Especially if you're fighting like a flying monster. But in this, like if something's flying, you just swap to your ranged weapon and then take care of it. And like that ability to just switch your approach on the fly is so, like I said, it really is a game changer. There's no other way to describe it. It completely changes how you play Monster Hunter.
Especially because having that access to the second weapon, extra items on your secret as well, just to kind of keep yourself healthy throughout the course of the fight. And there was a couple fights that really had me on my ropes. Being able to hop on, switch to the bow, and then take a more ranged approach because I knew I was low on how much health supplies I had left, just elongates the fight in a pretty natural way, because again, now you're adapting to your own needs as much as what the monster's throwing at you. Something I want to ask you both about, because obviously here, the open, quote unquote, open world, right? The open zones that are all kind of linked together now. Similarly, Hayes, when you were mentioning kind of like the pacing and the kind of the monotony of previous games, I feel like this approach to it makes everything flow a lot more. I'm not in the hub, then I'm waiting through a loading screen to get into the thing, to get to a loading screen, to get back out of the thing. Everything is kind of more seamless now. It's not an open world in that you're in one space and you could see three different biomes and you're kind of, moving across any which way. They all kind of flow into one another. It's more like open zones with corridors in between them. But I think it works. It made the world feel much more natural. And I'm someone who almost always would just fast travel places. I found myself kind of going on the ride more so than not here, just to kind of exist through that world a little bit more. So V, tell me, what do you think about this new approach to even just the world design?
I was a bit hesitant because a lot of games try to do open world stuff and it just crashes or it doesn't work, especially because Rise has the map itself, and then you could do whatever in that one map. Same with Arceus as well. Like the maps are there, you can go there and do whatever. So I thought, a game like this doing that, I thought there'd be loading issues here and there, because it's a big step. It's a very big step to do that, but it is streamlined more. That a lot of the maps have layers, like 3-4 layers itself, and it all loads incredibly well. Like there's no real stutter. There might be a small loading screen for a few seconds, but outside of that, it doesn't. There's no stopping. Like you're always just on the ready, and I really love that. And it also just emphasizes with like when you want to just go to your tent or go make a meal, and the fast travel stuff is great. And then also like you're always being updated on like the shifting of all the environmental changes for every single map, and I think that makes it feel like more of a realized world, because you would think like, oh, if you're on only Windward Plains, it'll only show you the updates for Windward Plains, but no, it'll show you the updates on different maps and like uh more specific items and materials you can gather right then, or like special rewards or something, and like weather changes. It tells you all of that for all of the maps, and I think that's fantastic. And there's no issue there whatsoever.
Yeah, and especially kind of how each area has its own different environmental states. Like they kind of cycle through specific like states of being that, and again, just the fact that the game keeps you appraised of all that because there's different benefits and dangers, and being in each one of those. Hayes, what about you, dude? How do you feel about the open world?
I think I wouldn't say it's like a drastic step up from World, but I think it's like a nice minor improvement. The map itself is much more readable and much more detailed, easy to navigate. And it still has, what I like is it still has that sense of being like a living world that the last game did so well, where, like if you run into a monster and you start fighting it, you might run into another monster and then it starts getting crazy, or like the weather comes in and suddenly you have a lightning storm that is hitting both you and the monster. Or I think it's the second area that I really liked with all the like oil slicks, which is really, there's fun little environmental details like the oil slicks that slow down your character and they have to like trudge through it. Or there's, geysers that you can light on fire. There's a lot of environmental interactions still. And I think the other thing that this open world really does well is it makes gathering so much easier, because now I don't have to go out of my way to gather things almost ever. I just, you can ride your Seikret through and just instantly grapple all the items to you, so you don't ever have to like get off your mount and go gather a bunch of items. You can literally just do it. Even just playing the story, the story does a good job of making you ride through these areas, and as you're riding through, you can get a nice little bump of crafting materials. And again, it's just that sense of pacing where like you don't have to really go out of your way to get what you need. The game makes sure that it's there available to you. But that being said, there's still a lot of alternate areas you can explore. Like there's a couple items I've found. I think one was like a Weavern coin, and I still don't know what it's for.
Okay, I'll tell you in DMs.
Okay. I just haven't figured it out yet, I guess.
Yeah, there's definitely like a subset of gatherable items that you don't really see unless you can't see the usage unless you progress through story. But there are like a lot of items that you're just like, oh, okay, it gave me 3 guild points. Who cares? But no, it's definitely for a lot of other stuff as well.
I do like that the open world also just makes the actual running into monsters feel much more natural, because now like when you're running around, even if you're just moving from point A to point B and you come across a monster that you want to fight, like it'll auto spawn like a quest on that monster in that spot. You fight it, and then once the fight's done, you're able to just kind of continue on. It doesn't just warp you back to base camp right away, breaking the flow of what you're doing. So even just existing in that world, if you're running around, whether it's you're grinding or whether you're trying to explore whatever else that you're doing, it all just flows together in a way that isn't like okay, here's a hard stop screen. It's going to now load you for 60 seconds back. By the way, you can end the missions right away. You don't have to sit there through 60 seconds of kind of ending. You can choose to do that whenever you want to now. There's just a lot of quality of life stuff that just eases, like it just takes a lot of the more monotonous, strenuous parts of it. And I don't think it makes it any easier, but it makes it flow in a way that just feels much more natural. And it feels like it just feels like a natural part of existing in that world rather than something that you have to do to check a box to do the next thing.
Yeah, I think that's important to point out, because I've thought about, like, as I've been writing my review and pieces and stuff, I've thought like a lot of this stuff is going to sound to people like it makes it an easier game. I think on paper you would be like, this sounds like you just don't have to do a lot of the hard stuff anymore. But I think the core experience is still there. That difficulty's still there. It just strips out a lot of that busy work, which some people have enjoyed, but I think a lot of people don't enjoy, myself included.
The thing is, it's like it's still there. If you want to hop off your
Yeah.
Seikret and run around and do all these things manually, you can. But if you just want to run through and hookshot everything over to you while you're making your way through it, entirely viable. Neither one, like, there's no wrong way to do it. It just gives you the option of having a more, I like, again, I'm hesitant to say streamlined, but just more flow state of a way of existing in that space. I also just really like that, the hunter design, it isn't just like male or female anymore. It's just like,
it's
there are
just like,
two different sets. Which one do you like more? You can use either.
Mhm.
Like, there's just a lot of little things that they do that just make the space feel more welcoming, not any less dangerous, but like it's still. Let's talk about the fights themselves. Obviously, Monster Hunter, the thing that everybody comes for, these gigantic moments with these larger than life and terrifying foes. V, how did you like the actual fights that that we went through?
it's scale. So with the story, it scales very well, and it actually like puts you later on with story stuff. Like it puts you in a panic of like some of these monsters appearing and like what are they? But there's also a sense of like reassurance that your characters, like Alma, like she knows what the monster is. Like your hunter knows what some of these monsters are, of
Mhm.
course. And there's like that reassurance, but some of these fights are like incredibly difficult and tough, but there's always different strategies you can use. Like with the weapon stuff, um I was just using sword and shield for like a bunch of stuff. But then like fighting different monsters, there are sometimes you have to switch different weapons like completely. Um and not just if they're flying or that sort of thing, but like the things they secrete or the things they do projectiles of, or like different thunder blights or blast blights or water blights. Um but I never felt like, oh, this is not like I can't accomplish this. And it
Mhm.
does start you off pretty like the main story, everything's very doable alone, which is
Mhm.
nice cuz like one of the biggest issues I know some people have in this franchise is like when you're doing the main story and some of them are just not doable alone, but like all the main ones are doable alone, and then it's just always refreshing in how to go about the combat. One thing I don't know if you both did as well, but like I'm collecting more of those pods and I'm using them so much. I'll
Same.
like
Mhm.
if there's like 5 or 6, I'll get the flints and I'll like use them all. Like it's and I never did that before with like the stones or here and there, and even the monsters they drop like little pods like heavy slicing or everything. And I like that like smaller monsters can be used to take down bigger monsters with like uh, the bristles or the rock bursts as well that you can find. There's more usage of the environment itself in
Mhm.
fights that I've never seen before, especially in Rise. Because I always felt like, yeah, there's no issue using your weapon, of course, but like using rock bursts or water pods or um, any of the pods to like slow down or hit specific weak points. It makes you more like on the fly, trying to figure something out, trying to use something, using different vine traps or
Mhm.
using those thorn pods to hit a monster so they're a bit slower. It feels like you're engaging more with the world and what's in the world as it's in and of itself,
Mhm.
and using the world uh to tackle what you need to and what's fearsome and what's troublesome for you.
Hayes, what about you, my dude? How'd you feel about the fights themselves?
Yeah, I think the thing that really stands out to me about this game, improvement over World and Rise in some ways, is like I think the monster designs are extremely unique. And that plays into even just the wound system, that plays into diversifying that system. So like without spoiling exactly what the monster is, there's one that's basically an octopus.
Mhm.
And like its wounds appear on the ends of its tentacles, which are like flailing all over the place. So it becomes a lot harder to target those wounds than on something that's like a big bear, you know?
Mhm.
So I think the monster designs themselves are incredibly unique and consistently challenging. I haven't beaten the game yet. I'm on chapter 4 now of the main story. But like,
Oh,
and I think that variety continues to get better as you get further. Like there's some really weird creatures in this game, like real weirdos. And I really enjoy that fact.
I have to agree. I feel like each fight is different than the one that came before. Like I feel like in some of these past entries, like you're fighting physically similar enemies one after the other,
yeah.
but here like the ramp feels gradual. Each fight, as you kind of overcome it, you feel ready for the next one, which will be bigger, more difficult, so on and so forth, or it will change the way that you're supposed to approach it. So the monster design really pushes you in a lot of ways to know your weapons, to know them early, and try to figure out how you want to get around them. It's just, and even within that, all these like cinematic big moments that happen during these fights just feel so awesome. Like, you know, running up on an enemy with a longsword, doing the jump, slashing back down, and because of the wound system and how, you know, depending on how many wounds they're at and how charged up my longsword is, being able to use different kinds of attacks and the way that everything flows, everything feels faster in this game than in World and in Rise. Not like a lot faster, but it feels just fast enough that it makes it all feel really cool to do, even in the moment. I kind of think they nailed it. Like there's like these fights are awesome. Even the quiet moments in between, like kind of Hazel, you mentioned at the top of this thing, top of the show, it's never long until your next one. You're not sitting through half an hour or 40 minutes of cutscenes until your next massive fight is coming. The lore that's there, and even just like kind of, you know, the world building moments are also big and bombastic or just ridiculous. Like those Wudwuds like have my heart entirely. I love those. I love those little guys.
Yeah. I think
So,
which something you just mentioned there, it's interesting, is this is the first Monster Hunter game that I think like has real lore to
mhm,
it.
Yeah.
yeah,
Like lore that has implications for the whole series, basically. Which is kind of crazy to think about, because I'm even the stories of last Monster Hunter games, like, you know, there's not some kind of history that you're learning really.
exactly. Yeah, this is much more involved in not just like the world, like not just the people, but the actual world and the history that led everything to the point where we pick up and start the story.
And the monsters themselves too.
100%.
I think it works well with the, because like your hunter, like all the expedition crew, they already know like this stuff is all very kind of basic and like the norm for them, and that's why like the history stuff works really well, because you're not in like a blank slate group trying to figure stuff out. Like they're very well known, and that implicates like a lot of like the lines they're saying or the way they approach things. You're just like, wait, what does that mean for like this previous game and that previous game?
Yeah, it's like watching a bunch of experts in their respective fields all at the same time come together to like figure out what this current situation is. It's really
Yeah.
satisfying to watch. Let me ask you both, anything that didn't work for you, any criticism, anything that you felt maybe missed the mark or didn't work as well as it should?
One thing that comes to mind for me is kind of the way your feline is used in battle. I know as you level it up, it spends more time in battle, but for a big part of the first part of this game, I kept being like, why is my feline leaving like 2 minutes into every battle? Just like 2 minutes in, it's like, I'll see you at camp. It's like, where are you going? I'm getting killed here. What are you doing? That's the only thing that's weird for me. I think it honestly just have the feline there for like the whole battle.
Mhm.
Is what I think. But that's really the only criticism I have. I think, man, everything else about this game just really works almost entirely. Everything just works together so well.
Yeah, V, any thoughts?
I don't feel like there's issues that I faced, even like technically or anything. Oh, I guess like it's so minor, but it's just like my guides writer thing. But it's basically, so I like that you can auto run on your Seikret, and then, but the thing is, when you open your map, it just like stops in place. Which I understand, like immersion wise, like yeah, they want you to see like all this stuff, but I also like need to get somewhere while I'm looking at the map, and I'd like to be physically moving on the map while I'm looking at the map, but it's not. It doesn't let you do that. So I think like that's
That's so interesting you say that, because I feel like I had the opposite problem. I'd open my map while I'm riding and it just kept moving, and I'm like, hold on, where am I? Where am I going? Yeah, it kept moving and it wouldn't stop. So I was like, where am I going? Obviously, like R2, like I wouldn't stop like with R2. I would just kind of trying to open, and I would just keep running with it. And I'm like, but for me, it was really disorienting because I couldn't figure out where I was and in relation to where I was going. Everything around me is moving. The map is also moving. And I'm just like, where am I?
Oh, I think it's because you're moving itself, but like when you try to like make a waypoint in the auto run, it doesn't let you do that. Yeah.
Okay.
But
the Seikret can be a little finicky too, especially like jumping down. There are times where like I couldn't jump off a cliff unless I made it run as fast as it can.
Yep.
But it's very minor stuff, though.
I will say that I actually did have a little bit of performance issues. I was playing on PS5 Pro, and the upper and lower bandwidths, the 60 frames per second was relatively stable. Like I didn't really have much. The lower bandwidth on 30 frames with like, increased visuals again looked good, but that middle PS5 Pro enhanced like was pretty stuttery. Even locking it to 40 frames, it was pretty inconsistent. Like it felt like it was closer to 30 most of the time. So I ended up I used that mode for a while before I just hopped off and went straight to 60 frames and just kind of left it there. But that PS5 Pro, I don't know if there's a day one patch coming that's going to address it, but I did have issues. They weren't significant enough that it hampered the experience, but they were noticeable when you're like running through, and it's stuttering a bit, along with texture popping. There was some pretty heinous texture popping, like even while like you're entering a conversation with the blacksmith and like there's still textures loading in behind for like half a second in as you're starting that conversation. I did have some performance issues. Again, nothing major enough, especially not in the fights, but it was noticeable. So like any PS5 Pro players, I would say, unless there's a patch that kind of irons that out, stick with the 60 or the 30, because that middle ground doesn't seem to really land as well as it should. I'm not sure if either one of you were on Pro playing on the same thing, but I did have some issues there.
That's got to be one of those cases that's just the Pro, I think, because I've been playing at 60 on base PS5 and had almost no issues.
Yeah, same. On 60, it was like almost flawless. It was just that middle 40 with like ray tracing turned on, but they're also trying to push past the 30. It was a really weird middle ground that just didn't entirely work all of the time.
I think it just wasn't like optimally developed for the Pro, because the Pro was kind of just out of nowhere.
And it could have just been a patch that it could be something that will be patched closer to or at launch. But for any PS5 Pro players, stick with the 60, or unless you want the visuals, go for the 30. But that middle ground, for me at least right now, wasn't entirely rock solid, which was a little bit disappointing given the Pro is supposed to be this whole thing. So kind of having that middle ground not be ironed out entirely was a little bit disappointing. But other than that, I don't really have any other complaints. So hit me with your closing thoughts, guys. What and anything you want to impart that we haven't talked about or haven't covered. Hit me with those final thoughts on Monster Hunter. V,
Hayes.
Yeah, Hayes, go ahead.
I don't think we had touched on it earlier, but one of the things that stands out to me is how easy this game is to play in single player.
Yes. Yeah.
Like you can send up the SOS flares and you get AI companions that join you if other players don't. And it all happens pretty quick. And the AI in this game is actually like pretty good in terms of fighting monsters. So I've only played with another human once in like 40 hours of this game. Everything else I played completely single player. And I think that's phenomenal. It's just, man, everything about this game has really impressed me. The thing that we can't go too deep into it, but the story is really what stands out to me the most here. Like, I think having that core Monster Hunter experience click has been good, but I was really blown away by how intricate and like involved this story actually is, and how good these characters are. Because that is not something I expected from a Monster Hunter game ever. Especially even like everything I've seen about this game, in previews and talking to developers, like story is not something they really ever talked about.
Yeah.
So I think that's the biggest surprise for me, is that this genuinely feels like a very well put together, very well executed story with characters that actually feel emotional and meaningful. And I think that just enhances the whole experience.
I have to agree. Like, I think the narrative is also just not more serious, but more thoughtful than I think I was expecting from a Monster Hunter game. And the fact that it lands with characters that have actual, emotional maturity, that depend on one another, that actually care about the world around them and the people there. Like, it's well handled in a way that I just wasn't really ready for or anticipating from this. So I'm glad you brought that back up. V, my dude, what about you?
I would just go with the story as well on. So like a lot of the stuff is about like who are you to trample on other people's. So like other games have done this. Warframe has like a fantastic side. It has a fantastic mission that I brought up to the creative director. That was phenomenal in this sense. But it's about like who are you to like trample on or change other people's traditions, and like um there's parts where like you're there's this like realized not hesitancy but this appropriative meticulous understanding of the different groups that you meet, and that that's their way of life, and if we can improve it and help in our own way, but we don't want to destroy their important traditions or their lifestyles. And like there's always that like carefulness that the main cast is bringing to these other groups, and I hope I can write something about that. But it's done, I've never seen the game do it throughout an entire story rather than just here and there. But the main group is just like consistently considerate of um the people they meet and their traditions and their lifestyles, and it's heartwarming. And you can tell that they put like they must have had a lot of sensitivity consultation in there, because it's just incredibly like meticulous, and it's just like very reassuring that they're able to do this. And also the game has turbines, so 10 out of 10 for me.
That's perfect. That 10 out of 10. That's more than enough reasons to give it 10 out of 10. Yeah, I think for me, I really love this game. I think again, as we mentioned, the story is fantastic. The combat's great. That focus and wound system. Also, just I felt like in some previous entries that I was just kind of flailing around at points trying to land a shot. That focus lets you really like hone in on where you want to damage and how you want to damage. I didn't feel like I was missing swings constantly. It takes what Monster Hunter is and really boils it down to its core elements, and then using that as to like a way to rebuild. It's also graphically incredible. This game is beautiful, like genuinely staggering in some of these moments, these vistas, and even like how dense the foliage is in the forests and other areas.
Wildlife too.
Yeah,
I mean, it's everywhere.
It's everywhere. They're all over the place, and in groups. Like there's so much life everywhere through Wilds that this is going to be a tough one to beat. And Hayes, like you mentioned, I hope that this is the game that for everybody who didn't hop in at Worlds, because I feel like there was a lot of people's hopping on point. I hope they give this one a shot, because there is genuinely something incredible here. And I feel like we're only at the end of February. We've already had like multiple Game of the Year contenders that we're going to be talking about at the end of the year. And Monster Hunter Wilds easily is in that conversation. It's genuinely incredible.
This is one of those games that's like, I have a hard time thinking of how you'd make it better, honestly. Like I can't really come up with, oh, it would be better if they changed this or did this. Like Capcom is, I mean, this is Capcom at the top of their game. It really is.
If it's like anything like Rise, they're probably gonna just add more like events and quests that are very timely. And I know like in Rise they added like Amaterasu's skin for your dog and that sort of stuff. So there is like even more time people can put in as well.
Yeah, this is a world you could very easily sink into and stay in for the next little while. And again, there's more games coming. It's an onslaught already, but Monster Hunter Wilds I think is very, very well worth your time. You will not be disappointed at any part of this. And again, it'll continue to surprise you, I think, all the way through. V, my dude, thank you so much for hanging out with us, talking Monster Hunter. Where can people see more of you?
Thank you very much for having me on. I cannot express my gratitude whatsoever. You can find me on Bluesky mostly nowadays. Veerender, Jubbal at Bluesky or whatever. However, I'm an easy find everywhere. But I'm an easy find there, and I still here and there cross post on Twitter, but mainly Bluesky, where when the embargo is done, then I can probably talk about Monster Hunter and how much I actually really enjoy it.
Hell yeah. Make sure you go find V on Bluesky. Hey, my dude, what about you?
Yeah, I'm also on Bluesky at Soulfleet. The bulk of my work you'll find either at inverse.com or Rolling Stone these days. It's kind of my two places.
Make sure you go follow both of these fantastic people and their work in all their respective places. As for myself, you can find me also on Bluesky because fuck Twitter. You can find me at Matt Silversoul, and of course, you can find us all over here at Console Creatures, and also you can find my other words at butwhythough.net. Folks, thanks for hanging out with us. Let us know in the comments, is Monster Hunter Wilds a day one for you? Let us know what you think. And thanks for watching. We'll be back next time. Peace.
Bye.